Learn Japanese history.
We are your navigators, Taro and Hanako.
Welcome to this deep dive. Today, we're really zeroing in on, well, a super transformative time
Yeah.
in Japanese history, the Meiji era.
Absolutely. For anyone starting out with Japan's past, this period, mid-19th to early 20th century, it's just fundamental.
It really is. It's when Japan, after centuries of being relatively closed off, just dove headfirst into modernity.
Yeah.
But, and this is the fascinating part, while still figuring out what to do with all its deep-rooted traditions.
Right. So today we're going to unpack some of those really big cultural shifts, things happening in literature, art, theater, music, even just everyday life, that collision of old and new.
Okay, let's jump in. What hits you first about the Meiji era's culture?
Well, the sheer speed and scale of change, I think. It's crammed into such a relatively short time. The Meiji Restoration wasn't just politics. It was like opening the floodgates to new ideas.
And you see that straight away in literature, don't you?
Definitely. You had this literary world that was, often about teaching morals or recounting history, pretty structured.
And then bam, this new wave appears.
Exactly. And a key figure, you have to mention him, is Tsubushi Shoyo. His Shosetsu Shinzui in 1885. That was a huge deal.
Not just a novel, right? It was theory.
Precisely. Literary theory. And here's the kicker. Shoyo argued novels shouldn't just be about, good guys winning and bad guys losing.
Uh-huh. More nuanced?
Way more. He pushed for depicting human emotions, society, warts and all, as they actually are. This focus on realism, it was revolutionary.
So it basically established modern literary theory in Japan, gave literature its own space.
Pretty much. And he really stressed digging into the psychology of characters. That was central for him.
So before this, was Japanese literature mainly about, say, idealized heroes or just straightforward moral lessons? What did this shift towards, real people do?
That's a great question. Yeah, earlier stuff often aimed to instruct. Didactic, you could say. Shoyo's call to show reality, including all the messy bits of human feeling and social problems, it was radical.
It must have encouraged a deeper look at, well, being human.
Absolutely. And this focus on the individual, the inner world, it perfectly mirrored the wider push towards individualism in Meiji society, part of that whole modernization drive.
Yeah.
People wanted to understand and express feelings.
Which leads us nicely into Romanticism, right?
Yeah.
That seems to fit perfectly with the focus on the individual.
Spot on. Romanticism really resonated. You had the Bungakukai, the literary world group with figures like Kitamura Tokoku and Shimazaki Tosen.
Right.
They celebrated freeing human nature, expressing personal feelings without holding back. This led to new kinds of poetry, new kinds of novels, very emotionally intense.
And it wasn't just these new groups, was it? People like Mori Ogai came back from Europe, from Germany, and it made a big splash too.
Yes, Ogai's return was significant. His time in Germany brought this, sophistication and psychological depth to his writing. He tackled complex themes, identity, cultural clashes, the individual in a changing world, really reflects the intellectual energy of the time.
And we absolutely have to talk about the women writers. Their contributions were huge.
Oh, definitely. You had incredible talents emerge. Higuchi Ichio, for instance. She captured the lives of ordinary people, their joys, their sorrows, with such delicate detail, just masterful.
And Yosano Akiko?
Ah, yes. Known for her passionate tanka poetry, her collection Midaragami, which came out in 1901, is just bursting with that individual emotional fire.
And Shimazaki Tosen, who you mentioned with the Romantics, didn't he have a poetry collection too?
He did. Wakanashu Collection of Young Herbs, 1897. It gathered works from the Bungakukai group. Even the cover art supposedly had this real freshness, capturing that youthful vibe.
Okay, so Romanticism is big. But then things shift again, right, towards naturalism, especially around the time of the Russo-Japanese War.
Right. Tastes evolved. Naturalism pops up, heavily influenced by French and Russian writers. Think Zola, maybe?
And this was different, Hal. More gritty.
Exactly. It took realism even further. Really unvarnished portrayals of life's darker side, society's problems, no sugarcoating. Writers like Shimazaki Tosen, the former romantic, and Teyama Katai moved in this direction.
Quite a swing from idealism.
It was. Naturalism aimed for almost scientific objectivity, often focused on the grim stuff, the flaws, without easy answers. Maybe reflecting some disillusionment with modernization's promises, a more critical eye on society.
But not everyone went down that path. Then Sume Soseki offered a different perspective.
Yes. Soseki is fascinating. Deeply influenced by English literature, but he took an anti-naturalist stance.
What did that look like?
He focused more on the inner spiritual lives of intellectuals. His style was intellectual, insightful, often witty. and people loved it. He gained a huge readership.
So you had these different streams flowing at the same time. Realism, romanticism, naturalism, Soseiki's intellectual approach.
A really complex, dynamic literary scene. It wasn't just one thing.
And that same dynamism, that tension between tradition and new influences, you see it clearly in the art world too, right?
Absolutely. There was this real push and pull. On one hand, embracing Western art styles. On the other, a serious effort to, keep traditional Japanese art alive and vibrant.
People worried it might get lost.
There was definitely that concern. Figures like Fenollosa, an American actually, and Okakura Tenshin were huge advocates for traditional Japanese art. They really championed its value.
And the government got involved.
They did. They set up the Tokyo School of Fine Arts, and Okakura later founded the Japan Art Institute, both aimed at nurturing Japanese-style art. This helped painters like Yokoyama Taikan emerge.
But at the same time, Western art was coming in. Impressionism.
Yes, French Impressionism arrived, spearheaded by Kuroda Seki. He'd studied in Paris, brought back this fresh style, brighter colors, capturing light. The outer light school, they called it.
Yeah, that famous painting, Lakeside.
Koan, yeah. Exhibited in 1897, a great example of the style. And interesting little detail, the model was his wife.
So how did the establishment handle these two streams, traditional Japanese and Western?
The government kind of aimed for coexistence.
Balance.
They set up the Ministry of Education Fine Arts Exhibition, the Bunten. It was a big deal, a platform for both Japanese-style Nihonga and Western-style yoga painters.
And traditional art was still highly valued. Like that Hashimoto Gaho screen painting.
Oh, Ryuko Zu, the Dragon and Tiger. Yes, magnificent piece. The tiger part shown at the 1895 Domestic Exposition, a really powerful example of traditional artistry holding its own.
Okay, let's shift to theater. Kabuki was still huge, right? From the Edo period.
Kabuki was thriving. The late 19th century is often called a golden age, actually. You had these incredible star actors, Ichikawa Denjiro next, Onoe Kikugoro v. Ichikawa Sadanji. The Dan Kikusa era, they call it.
But new forms were bubbling up, too.
Definitely. Towards the end of the Meiji period, you get Shinpa, the new school theater. Kawakami Otojiro was a key figure there.
And Shinpo was different because
it tackled contemporary social issues, things happening now, a different flavor from Kabuki's historical or legendary tales. And then, even later in the Meiji era, modern Western drama starts getting introduced, too, so the stage was getting more diverse.
Fascinating. What about music? You mentioned Western influences there, too.
Big time. The Tokyo Music School was established that really kicked off formal Western music education. Composers like Takeru Taro came out of that.
And Western songs started appearing in schools.
Yeah, shoka, they were called. Part of the elementary curriculum, a deliberate move to spread familiarity with Western music.
Speaking of official music, the national anthem, Kimigayo. Its story's pretty interesting, isn't it? Not straightforward.
Not at all. The lyrics are ancient from a poem in the Kokenshu, used way back as a celebration song.
But the melody we know wasn't the first one.
Nope. The first melody, 1870, was by a British military band guy, Fenton, used for army reviews, but people felt it lacked dignity. So, scrapped.
Okay, so attempt number 2.
Attempt 2, 1880. This time, the Imperial Household's Gagaku department, that's the ancient court music division, got involved. Hayashi Hiramori and others created a melody using traditional Gagaku scales, very Japanese roots.
But didn't a German get involved too?
He did. Franz Eckert, a German Navy music director, he arranged the Gagaku-based melody for Western wind instruments, that blend again.
And that's the version that stuck.
Pretty much. It was performed for the Emperor's birthday in November 1880. The Navy even published the score later, sent it out internationally. And then, crucially, in 1893, the Ministry of Education designated it for school ceremonies on holidays.
Alongside other specific songs.
Yeah, like Ichigatsu Chujitsu, Kigensetsu, Tenchisetsu. So through this process, blending Japanese tradition and Western arrangement, it gradually became the anthem everyone recognized.
It really shows that complex blending happening everywhere. Which brings us to how information spread and how life changed day to day. Newspapers and magazines must have been huge.
Absolutely vital, especially in the cities, for spreading all these new cultural ideas.
Initially, they were quite political, linked to the freedom and people's rights movement.
In the 1880s, yes. The Oshinbun, the big political papers, lots of commentary, debate.
But didn't they also build on older traditions? Like the Edo Kawaraban.
Right, those illustrated news sheets. So by the 1890s, you see the rise of popular national newspapers focus more on just reporting the news for everyone.
And wars probably boosted readership.
Definitely.
Right.
The Sino-Japanese War, the Russo-Japanese War. People wanted news. Plus, education was spreading. Literacy rates were going up. So you ended up with these influential papers selling tens of thousands of copies by the late Meiji era.
And this wasn't just about reading habits changing, but living habits too. Western clothes, food, houses.
It started in official places, government, schools, companies, the army. Then it gradually trickled down into general urban life.
Things like electric lights.
Exactly. Public facilities got them from the 1880s. By the late Meiji period, more common in homes, at least in cities, you saw Western-style buildings going up, people eating more meat, wearing Western clothes.
But not a total switch. People mix things up.
Very much so. It was often a practical blend, maybe Western suit for the office, then back into a kimono at home. Skillful adaptation.
And getting around change too. Trains, post, telegraph,
Yeah.
phones.
All of that. Railroads, postal service, telegraph, and then telephones came in during the 1890s. It genuinely expanded people's worlds, connected them beyond their local town or village, fostered a sense of being part of Japan.
But there was still a big gap between city and countryside.
Oh, absolutely. That divide was real. Like, food white rice was common in cities, but out in the country. Still mostly barley mixed with rice. Or electric lights took much longer to reach rural areas. Oil lamps were the norm there for a long time.
Let's talk a bit more about that urban food culture. Sounds like it was really diversifying.
It really was. By the late Meiji era, cities like Tokyo had a huge variety. That 1897 survey showed tons of restaurants, little eateries, tea houses, kisaten,
Beef shops were popular.
loads of them, serving sukiyaki, which was becoming popular, but also Western dishes like omelets, cutlets, beefsteak. And get this, a beer hall opened in Shimbashi in 1899.
A beer hall. Seriously.
Yep, served beer, obviously, but also sandwiches. And it was apparently wildly popular, led to more opening up.
Wow. Even fruit was changing.
Yeah, you had your traditional peaches, pears, persimmons, mandarins, but also new imports or newly cultivated things like American apples grown up in Aomori and Hokkaido, and bananas and pineapples coming in from Taiwan, which was a colony then.
Paints such a vivid picture. But that rice difference highlights the urban-rural split. You mentioned an anecdote.
Right, about city daughters going back to visit their rural families and apparently turning their noses up at the barley rice mixture they grew up with. Troubled their mothers, you can imagine, shows how tastes and expectations were changing, but unevenly.
So, wrapping this up, the Meiji era. Just an incredible period of cultural ferment, wasn't it?
Truly remarkable across everything: literature, art, theater, music, how people got information, how they lived. You see this constant dynamic interplay. Tradition meeting Western influence, adapting, clashing, merging.
And its legacy is just immense.
Yeah.
So much of modern Japanese culture and society has its roots right here.
It really does.
Yeah.
Which maybe leads to a final thought for you, listening. How does this Meiji period of intense change and cultural blending resonate with you? Maybe compared to other historical moments of transformation, you know?
Yeah, or even thinking about global interactions today, the way cultures mix now.
Well-
What parts of this Meiji story, this collision of old and new, do you find most surprising or maybe most thought-provoking as you dig deeper into Japanese history? Something to mull over.